Welcome back. Right now, the Senate, as you see there, voting on whether to override Trump's veto of 3 bills blocking the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. All 3 are expected to fail, but the bills passed both congressional chambers with bipartisan support and were widely seen as a condemnation of Trump's close relationship with Saudi Arabia in the wake of the brutal murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Today, my colleague, Ayman Mohyeldin, out with an expose about the kingdom's quest to quell dissidents like Khashoggi, breaking down, quote, the extent to which Saudi authorities have gone to imprison, repatriate, and even murder countrymen who dare protest the kingdom's policies or malign the image of the nation. Many have pointed to Trump's coziness with the de facto ruler of the kingdom, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS. Now, despite a United Nations report directly linking him to Khashoggi's killing, Trump had this to say about him just last month.
The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, a friend of mine, a man who has really done things in the last 5 years. I want to just thank you on behalf of a lot of people, and I want to congratulate you. You've done really a spectacular job.
All right, I'm joined by Ayman Mohyeldin, co-host of Morning Joe First Look, my co-host on Morning Joe First Look. Good to be on you with evening, despite
12-hour days.
12-hour days. So we're just hearing now the votes have all failed. So It seems as if MBS, despite all that has gone on, despite your investigation, finding out so many of these dissidents, these activists gone missing, people within the royal family gone missing, the brutal killing of Jamal Khashoggi at the embassy in Turkey, MBS, the Kingdom of Saud, not being held responsible for their actions.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask U.S. officials, and we have posed the questions to it, they will say that those responsible for the killings, at least on a mid-level within the government and operational, level, would have been held accountable by the U.S. because they've been sanctioned. But really, when you kind of look at it and dig a little bit deeper, it's hard to imagine the way this played out and the way these operations have been carried out as we've been investigating over the past couple of months, that there wasn't more of a coordinated, wider policy in place to try and silence these critics. And so if there is a willingness to accept what happened to Jamal Khashoggi on a personal level, the question then becomes, what is it going to take to accept responsibility for members of the American Congress and others to try and hold Saudi Arabia accountable for some of these actions? Because what we've learned, and as what we've reported on our NBC News site, is that more and more Americans have been caught up in this. Sometimes intentionally, they've gone after dual citizens, Saudi American citizens. Sometimes they've gone after Saudi citizens who have American relatives. And in other cases, Americans have literally been kidnapped while the Saudis were targeting Saudi royals and princesses that may have been involved or part of that entourage.
Talk about that portion of your piece, the 3 Americans that were kidnapped. What happened to them?
So there was a prominent Saudi prince who was bringing a legal complaint against the Saudi government and the royal family for the way that they had treated him. He had accused them of previously kidnapping them from Switzerland, flying him back to Saudi Arabia. And ultimately, he secured his release. He came for treatment in the United States and wanted to file that complaint. And so the Saudi Arabian government, according to our investigation, went after him again. And this time they kidnapped him from France and brought him to Saudi Arabia. Part of his entourage included 3 Americans, and these 3 Americans were brought into the kingdom, held against their will, their phones, their laptops, all confiscated. They were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements before they were sent back to the United States. And this was something that is very rarely reported on, that Americans, like these 3 individuals, have been caught up in some of these operations that the Saudis have carried out.
And you have instances of activists being kidnapped and taken and never to be heard from again. Of course, we know the incident with Jamal Khashoggi. How much a part, we have heard from our intelligence agencies that MBS was integral to what took place with Jamal Khashoggi at that embassy. How much a part with some of the pieces that you found was MBS?
It's really hard to find a silver bullet or some kind of, decree that says do this. But at the end of the day, when you kind of talk to Saudi experts and American and Western officials who track this, it's hard to imagine that something like this could happen inside the kingdom without the knowledge of the senior leaders of that country. This is not a rogue operation. This seems to be a pattern of behavior. And so that's why experts have been saying it seems more and more likely that there was a policy in place that was designed from the powers that be high above and to be executed by mid-level officials across the government and the various Saudi security and intelligence services.
Well, it's a breathtaking piece, so I thank you for your work, Ayman Mohyeldin. You can find his full report on NBCnews.com. We'll be right back.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.